Peace is online now for the Washington Post. Does a great job shining an important light on this issue that doesn't get enough attention. Gene, thanks so much. Always great to see you.
Good to see you, Willie.
All right, we have crossed into the top of the hour just after 7 o'clock here on the East Coast. President-elect Trump's embattled pick for Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is brushing aside suggestions that he will take himself out of consideration for the job. This despite continued concern from some Republican senators about his past conduct and his qualifications. NBC News senior Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Haake has the latest.
New public hints of potential Republican opposition to President-elect Trump's pick for Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. Iowa's Joni Ernst saying she's not ready to support him.
I think for a number of our senators, they want to make sure that any allegations have been cleared, and that's why we have to have a very thorough vetting process.
Other Republicans non-committal after their meetings with Hegseth.
I know he's having meetings. I know some of them are tough. I wouldn't say mine was the easiest.
But Hegseth telling us he's optimistic.
Mr. Hegseth, do you feel like you're making progress in these meetings?
Great meetings. And this is how the process works. It's not going to be tried out here. It's going to be discussed inside the offices, how we rebuild our military, put the warfighters first. That's what Donald Trump, President Trump, has asked me to do.
Are there any circumstances where you would withdraw from this process?
I'm here with the support of President Donald Trump. As long as he supports me, which he told me this morning, I'll be here.
Hegseth, the former Fox News host and decorated combat veteran, facing negative headlines, including an NBC News report that 10 current and former Fox News employees say he drank in ways that concern them. Hegseth saying he does not have a drinking problem. And a sexual assault claim from 2017, which he denies. Police investigated and he was not charged.
It sounds like you're still not fully determined whether you'll support this nominee.
Most nominees, what you'll do is you'll have your open hearing. Pete Hegseth went a long way today, in my opinion, in getting my full support. But I want him to be able to answer in front of everybody else the questions that are there.
I see no reason at this point to not be supportive of him.
That's NBC's Garrett Haake reporting from Capitol Hill. Joining our conversation, the host of MSNBC's Inside with Jen Psaki, and staff writer at The New Yorker, Susan Glasser. Good morning to you both. Jen, I'll start with you. As someone with a lot of experience in Washington, you've watched nominees be sort of paraded around Capitol Hill. You've watched difficult confirmation hearings. What do you make, let's focus on Hegseth for the moment, of some of what we heard yesterday? Is that Republican senators kind of going through the motions saying, I'm open to the possibility, or some just going outright saying, yes, I'm supportive of his nomination? Is that just a reaction to all the other reporting that says perhaps Donald Trump has moved on even in his mind from Pete Hegseth? Or do you think there's actually now some renewed movement to keep him in the game?
I think there's what's happening publicly, and then there's what's happening privately. And what's happening privately really tells you the whole story with nominations. This didn't always used to be the case. It used to be many years ago that senators would come out and they would just say, I'm going to vote for this person, or I'm not going to vote for this person. But now, because so many Republican senators especially are concerned about being a target of Trump, all of this is basically quiet defiance. That's what you saw with Matt Gaetz, and I think that's what you're seeing right now with Pete Hegseth. What was interesting, I don't know if you all saw Senator Blumenthal's comments yesterday with a senator from Connecticut, a Democrat, who said there are 8 to 10 Republicans, or 5 to 10 maybe, he said, which is quite a range, who he thinks would oppose Hegseth. And what I expect is going to happen here is that this is going to be quietly a nomination that is killed over the next couple of days, meaning people on the Hill, senators, whether it's McConnell or others, will convey to the Trump team that he simply does not have the votes. And then Trump has to decide what he wants to do from there. Does he pick another nomination? But we're already seeing names floating out there, which is coming from somewhere in the Trump orbit. So that tells you a lot. So I would say these public comments are these senators more trying not to be the target. They know where this is headed. All of the conversations are happening behind the scenes. And I suspect some of them, including Senator Ernst, may want the job, too, which always tells you something as well.
Yeah, without question. That's an important point. And she met with Pete Hegseth yesterday and came out, as we saw in Garrett's piece there, and said she was still open to his nomination. I think you're right that a lot of people don't want to be the ones coming out publicly crossing Donald Trump, at least giving the appearance that they're giving Hegseth. a fair hearing. So, Susan, in your latest piece of The New Yorker, you're writing about all the controversy surrounding President-elect Trump's picks here, including Pete Hegseth and notably Kash Patel at FBI. Susan writes, in part, in just the past few days, the French government collapsed, civil war in Syria reignited, and South Korea's president briefly declared martial law. But here in Washington, Donald Trump's brand of political chaos is a world unto itself. Trump revealed perhaps his most dangerous decision yet, a plan to install Kash Patel, an ostentatious Trump loyalist who has explicitly promised to go after Trump's political enemies in the press and in both parties as the next director of the FBI. Susan writes, who exactly gets confirmed to what job may not yet be known, but this much looks more clear with each Trump appointment. Internal purges, far more than anything overseas, will be the order of the day in Trump 2.0. Susan, I'll let you expound a little more on your piece, but whether it's Kash Patel or Pete Hegseth or someone that is slightly more palatable to these senators, it seems you're right that Donald Trump, the grievance and everything he talked about on the campaign trail, the retribution will be carried out by whoever sits in those jobs.
Well, that's right. You know, we're focusing understandably on the controversial background and apparently unvetted nature of some of these appointees, Pete Hegseth being one example. So it's understandable that where investigative reporters are doing the hard work that it seems the Trump campaign itself did not do of figuring out just exactly who he's putting up for these jobs. The Secretary of Defense, I would point out, is, literally in the line of nuclear command and control. This is a very serious position. So it's not a distraction to focus on their personal issues. But I think more broadly, what are these controversies telling us about President Trump in a second term? And you see that the agenda of kind of revenge and retribution, almost a redefinition of America first. It's not just a foreign policy statement anymore. It's an idea about targeting enemies within. And I think that Trump himself was very clear about that. There's a really striking comment that didn't get as much attention as it could have in October before the election, where he basically said, we have two kinds of enemies. We have Russia and China, and then we have the enemy within. And I think that's the more dangerous one. And so to me, when you look at Kash Patel at the FBI or Pete Hegseth, a lot of what he's written and talked about in recent years, it's not about Russia and China. When he talks about being Pentagon chief, he's targeting America's own generals that he considers to be too focused on diversity and not focused enough on what he wants them to focus on. He's talking about the internal threats from the Pentagon and not the Pentagon's job of keeping America safe from external threats. And so I think that's the big picture here in all of this. But I agree with Jen in terms of her assessment right now. These senators don't want to be the ones to challenge Trump publicly on any one of these nominations, and just hope that somehow the process and the math gives them the ability not to have to make an uncomfortable public vote.
Jen, Susan's right. The stakes couldn't be higher, but it occurs to me the one useful role that Pete Hegseth is playing right now is he's taking up all the attention. He's taking up all the oxygen, allowing some of Trump's other controversial picks, Tulsi Gabbard, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Kash Patel, to kind of go quietly unnoticed, for at least for the moment. And that allows them to be perhaps normalized and quietly build support. We played from sound from Senator Cornyn earlier in the morning, suggesting he believed that Kash Patel, who many feel is deeply unqualified and problematic, he thinks he'll get through without much of a problem, in part because senators can only say no so many times.
Well, maybe. But here's the thing. They're not saying no publicly, so it doesn't count on a chit against them necessarily. This is a process right now, and we'll see how many more this happens with, where there are quiet conversations among Republican members who are saying, we can't have this person in this job. I mean, if you look at, I know we keep talking about Pete Hegseth, but he is front and center right now. The Secretary of Defense role, Secretary Austin regularly has meetings right now where he's determining where to move forces and troops around the world and where to move resources. He is a person who sits at the table in international events and international meetings and negotiates with his counterparts and says, we can't give you that military equipment. We can't give you those planes, or you need to kind of step back and be more restrained in your military action. Can Pete Hegseth do that? I mean, I know my view is, but I think for a number of Republican senators, they're legitimately asking that question. I don't know that he is long for the last in this nomination. We will see. But I think the question is, who's next in terms of the target for quiet defiance. Is it Kash Patel? Is it Tulsi Gabbard? I think it's probably one of the two of them. And these hearings are not going to start until January. So to me, the next 2 weeks could be quite interesting. You're right, though. If you're Tulsi Gabbard or Kash Patel, you're delighted right now that all of the focus is on Pete Hegseth. But I do think that the way that it's working so far could work for a couple of additional nominees, that there's discomfort, I think, on a bipartisan level about.
It really has just been next level, though, in terms of how ridiculous the process can get. You know, Caddy, there are reports that Pete Hegseth's mother has been calling senators to lobby on his behalf. Can you think of any other cabinet position where the candidate's mother has called to rally the troops for her son?
I also felt, I don't know if you felt this too, Elise, but watching her on the Fox News interview, it looked kind of like a sort of hostage video. She looked so uncomfortable to be there, and maybe that's just because she's not used to being on television very much. But the whole thing feels incredibly awkward. And you say, next level, we haven't seen this kind of thing before. My question would be, Willie, at what point does Donald Trump feel he needs to kind of crack the whip and get Republican senators in line and show that he is the boss of the party again? Because you've now had Matt Gaetz going, you had the DEA pick from Florida going of his own accord. It's possible that Pete Hegseth doesn't make it. I mean, at what point does he say he needs to feel he has to show that he is reasserting control over Republican senators? How much of a leash do they have? So far, they seem to be able to push back against him. And I've heard from some who are thinking, you know, that they may not be around to run again, that they will continue to exercise that role of pushing back against the president, some of these Republican senators. But I wouldn't be surprised if at some point Donald Trump loses his patience and says, OK, I'm done now. This is it. You all fall into line.
Without question. I think we saw a glimmer of that when the DEA choice stepped aside and Donald Trump quickly put out a statement saying he didn't step aside. I told him to step aside. He wants to show the public, at least, and his supporters that he's in control of this process. On yesterday's show, we spoke with Politico's Jonathan Martin about his new reporting that the Biden White House is discussing preemptive pardons for those who might be the focus of potential revenge prosecution by Donald Trump's allies. This morning, the New York Times following up on J. Mart's report, adding that Democrats on Capitol Hill also have been pressing Mr. Biden to do what he can to protect targets of Mr. Trump. Among them, Congressman Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, one of the president's closest allies, who urged the White House to consider preemptive pardons shortly after Mr. Trump's election last month, and likewise recommended that the president pardon his son, Hunter. Congressman Clyburn telling the paper, I think there are a lot of people who are coming into this next administration who are telling us who they are. I've seen Kash Patel saying who he's going after, and so why should we not believe them? But as White House officials weigh the matter, they are concerned that such a move would fuel the impression spread in conservative media that the recipients actually had done something wrong. The Times goes on, at least some of those who would be obvious candidates for such pardons have said privately they would not want one because of such an implication. So, Susan Glasser, this is a sort of an odd one here, which is issuing blanket pardons to people who have not committed any crimes, but about whom you're concerned that Kash Patel or the Trump Justice Department or the FBI or whoever will go after. What's your take on this? It sounds like it's picking up some traction, but it also sounds like a lot of these people say, wait a minute, I don't want to have some admission, or at least the perception of admission, that I've done something wrong.